A problem statement has a structure, whether you name it or not. When problem statements feel unclear or keep getting pushback, it is usually not because the idea is weak. It is because the structure is incomplete or out of order. This video makes that structure explicit, so you can tell whether your problem statement is actually doing the work it needs to do. A well-structured problem statement follows a clear internal sequence: phenomenon, tension, and consequence. When these elements are present and logically connected, the problem statement reads as research. When one is missing or blurred, it reads as description, opinion, or a local concern. The goal here is not to memorize a formula, but to understand the logic your reader needs to follow. The first element is the phenomenon. This is where the problem statement begins. The phenomenon names what is happening in the real world. It is observable, ongoing, and described without judgment. This is not the place to argue, evaluate, or propose a solution. The purpose of the phenomenon is to orient the reader to the condition or pattern that exists. If the opening sounds like a claim, a recommendation, or a conclusion, the structure is already off. The second element is the tension, and this is where students often overcomplicate things. The tension is simply the reason we cannot fully understand, explain, or act on the phenomenon yet. It is what is unresolved, limited, inconsistent, or unclear in what we currently know. This is what many people call the gap, but it helps to think of it as a tension in the evidence rather than an absence of research. There are several common and very normal ways tension shows up in the literature. Sometimes the tension is about evidence. You find studies, but the samples are small, narrow, or limited to specific contexts. The population you care about may be missing or underrepresented. The research may be dated even though the phenomenon has evolved, or the outcomes being measured may not align with the real concern you are trying to understand. Sometimes the tension is about approach. You may find mostly quantitative studies that show patterns, but do not explain how or why those patterns occur. You may find mostly qualitative studies that provide rich insight but lack scope or comparison. Or you may find mixed results across approaches, where different designs lead to different conclusions. In these cases, the tension is not that research does not exist. The tension is that the type of research available is not sufficient to fully understand the problem. Another common form of tension is inconsistency. You encounter studies that point in different directions, use different definitions, or lead to conflicting interpretations. When the evidence does not converge, the tension is that current knowledge cannot reliably inform practice, policy, or design. This is important. A gap is not a scavenger hunt for nothing. Most gaps are patterns of limitation in what already exists. As you read the literature, you are looking for what we know, what we think we know, and what we still cannot say with confidence because of how the research has been done so far. Phrases like limited by, few studies, inconsistent findings, little is known, or future research should, are often signals that tension is present. The third element is the consequence. This is where the problem statement answers why the tension matters. Consequence explains what happens if the tension remains unexamined. This is not about worst-case scenarios or dramatic claims. It is about long-term patterns and cumulative effects. Consequence connects the problem to stakes that extend beyond one individual or one setting. It clarifies who is impacted and what decisions remain uninformed if the problem persists. It is also important to understand what the problem statement is not doing. The problem statement does not solve the tension. That is the role of the research questions. The problem statement names the tension clearly enough that the questions can investigate it. When students try to answer the tension inside the problem statement, the structure collapses. Structure also helps clarify what does not belong in a problem statement. A problem statement is not a list of variables. It is not a mini literature review. It is not a justification of your personal interest. And it is not a description of your method. Those elements have a place later. When they appear inside the problem statement, they blur the logic and make it harder for the reader to see what the actual problem is. Another common structural issue is stacking multiple tensions into one statement. When a problem statement tries to address too many issues at once, none of them become clear enough to study. A strong problem statement names one central tension and carries it through to its consequence. Other issues may exist, but they do not belong in this sentence. It is also important to understand that this process is iterative. Most people do not write a perfect problem statement on the first pass. You often begin by identifying a provisional phenomenon, tension, and consequence. Then, as you read more deeply in the literature, you return to refine them. The literature does not come first or last. It informs the problem statement, and the problem statement tells you what literature actually matters. This back and forth is normal, not a sign that you are doing it wrong. A simple way to check your structure is to ask 4 questions in order. What is happening? What about it is not working or not understood? Why we cannot answer this adequately with the evidence we have? What happens if that remains unresolved? If you cannot clearly underline the phenomenon, the tension, and the consequence in your own statement, the structure is not finished yet. When this structure is sound, everything downstream becomes easier. The literature review becomes more focused because you are reading to explain a specific tension. The purpose statement becomes easier to defend because it clearly responds to that tension. The research questions stop drifting because they are anchored to a defined problem. The problem statement becomes the anchor of the study, rather than a hurdle to get past. This is what a problem statement structure overview is meant to do. It gives you a way to see whether your problem statement is complete, coherent, and ready to support the rest of your work.